Jake Morrison could taste blood in his mouth as the alien guards dragged him through the crystal corridors. His hands were chained behind his back with metal that burned his skin whenever he moved. The uniform he had been so proud of 3 days ago was now torn and stained with his own blood. Every step sent pain shooting through his ribs, where the guards had beaten him during the endless hours of questions. Beside him, Amy Parker stumbled as the guards pushed her forward. The metal crown on her head sparked with blue light every few seconds, and each time it did, she would gasp and her eyes would go blank for a moment. The neural inhibitor was designed to stop her from thinking clearly, to make her compliant and easy to control. But Jake could see the anger still burning in her eyes when the device gave her a moment of clarity. They had been part of something called the diplomatic mission. Their ship, the UES Defiant, had carried them across the galaxy to meet with the Zephyrian Empire. The mission was supposed to be simple. Go to the alien homeworld, sit at a table, and work out a peace treaty. Humans and Zephyrians would stop fighting and start trading. Everyone would benefit, but it had all gone wrong. The problem started when Amy discovered something she was not supposed to see. As the communications officer, she had access to the ship's computer systems. While trying to set up the diplomatic channels, she had accidentally tapped into a Zephyrian data stream. What she found there made her blood run cold. The Zephyrians were not interested in peace. They were planning something called the Harvest. Human colonies across the galaxy were marked for collection. Not conquest, collection. The files Amy found talked about humans the way farmers talked about cattle. Genetic material to be gathered, biological resources to be processed, specimens to be studied. The worst part was the experiments. The Zephyrians had been testing their methods on smaller human settlements for months. Entire populations had vanished, taken to research stations where they were used as test subjects for biological weapons. The survivors were kept alive in facilities that the reports called breeding centers. Jake and Amy had tried to warn Earth. They had sent emergency messages through every channel they could access. But the Zephyrians had been monitoring their communications. Within hours of sending the first warning, alien soldiers had stormed their quarters and dragged them away. The interrogation had lasted 3 days. The Zephyrians had not used traditional torture. Instead, they had used devices that could reach into a person's mind and pull out thoughts and memories. Jake had felt his privacy being stripped away layer by layer as the aliens searched through his life. They had looked at his childhood, his training, his relationships. They had examined every moment of his existence looking for evidence of espionage. Amy had suffered worse. The neural probes had been designed for human minds, and they had torn through her thoughts like daggers. She had screamed until her voice gave out, then screamed silently as the machines continued their work. Jake had been forced to watch, chained to a chair in the corner of the room, as the woman he cared about was slowly torn apart, but they had found nothing because there was nothing to find. Jake and Amy were not spies. They were not part of some grand conspiracy. They were just two humans who had stumbled onto the truth and tried to do the right thing. Now they were being taken to face judgment. The throne room was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into darkness, and the floor was smooth as glass. Hundreds of alien nobles filled the space, their chittering voices echoing off the walls like the sound of insects in a summer night. The Zephyrians were tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. Their faces were almost human, but their eyes were too large and too dark, and their mouths were filled with teeth that looked like needles. They wore clothing that seemed to be made of the same living crystal as the walls, and many of them had modifications to their bodies that Jake did not want to think about too closely. At the center of the room stood the throne, and on the throne sat Queen Valtara. She was larger than the other Zephyrians, her 4 arms thick with muscle, and her skin a deep purple color that seemed to absorb light. Her crown was not metal but some kind of living organism that moved and pulsed on her head. When she spoke, her voice was like the sound of breaking glass, and the translation device in Jake's ear turned her words into cold, mechanical English. "Bring the humans forward," she commanded. The guards pushed Jake and Amy toward the throne. The crowd of nobles pressed closer, their chittering voices growing louder. Jake could feel their eyes on him, studying him like he was some kind of interesting specimen. He tried to stand straight despite the pain in his ribs, tried to show them that humans were not afraid. Queen Valtara looked down at them with her dark eyes. "You have been found guilty of espionage against the Zephyrian Empire," she sighed. "You have attempted to interfere with our lawful expansion into human space. You have violated the trust that was placed in you as diplomatic representatives." "We were trying to save lives," Amy said, her voice hoarse from screaming. The neural inhibitor sparked, making her wince, but she continued speaking. "Your people are planning to murder billions of innocent humans." The Queen's skin shifted to a darker shade of purple. "We are planning to make efficient use of available resources. Your species has been classified as suitable for biological research." "This is not murder, this is science." "It's genocide," Jake said. "And when Earth finds out what you're planning, they'll stop you." The Queen made a sound that might have been laughter. "Earth will never find out. Your warning messages were intercepted and destroyed. As far as your government knows, the diplomatic mission is proceeding smoothly. They will not realize what has happened until it is too late." She stood up from her throne, her forearms spreading wide. "You have seen things you were not meant to see. You have learned truths that were not meant for your species. For this, you must be punished in a way that will serve as an example to others." The crowd of nobles chittered excitedly, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "The male will be burned in the sacred flames of purification," the Queen announced. "Let his death show what happens to those who oppose our will." She pointed one of her arms at Amy. "The female will bear the mark of eternal shame. She will be branded with the symbol of her treachery, and will serve as a living reminder of the price of defiance." The crowd erupted in chittering cheers. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest as guards moved toward him and Amy. He tried to pull away, but the chains held him tight. "Wait," he called out. "You don't have to do this. We can work something out." But the Queen was no longer listening. She had returned to her throne, and the guards were already dragging Jake and Amy toward different exits from the throne room. As they were separated, Jake caught Amy's eye one last time. She was crying, but there was still fire in her gaze. They had tried to do the right thing, and now they were going to die for it. But as the guards pulled him away, Jake made himself a promise. If there was any way to survive what was coming, he would find it. And if he lived, he would make sure that the galaxy knew what the Zephyrians were really planning. The Queen thought she was ending their story. She had no idea that she was just beginning it. The pain was like nothing Jake had ever felt before. The plasma flames wrapped around his body like liquid fire, burning through his uniform and into his skin. He screamed until his throat was raw, then screamed more as the fire consumed him. The crowd of alien nobles watched and cheered as the sacred flames of purification did their work. But something was wrong. Jake should have died in the first few seconds. The plasma was hot enough to turn a human body to ash in moments. Instead, he found himself still conscious, still aware, still feeling every second of agony as the flames ate at his flesh. The experimental treatments came back to him in flashes of memory. 2 years ago, he had volunteered for the military's new pilot program. They had injected him with something they called cellular enhancement serum. It was supposed to help pilots survive the extreme conditions of deep space flight. High radiation, temperature swings, pressure changes that would kill a normal human. The scientists had warned him there might be side effects. His body might change in ways they could not predict. But Jake had been young and eager to serve, and the pay was good. He had signed the papers without reading them carefully. Now, as the plasma burned him, those changes were keeping him alive. His cells were absorbing the energy and converting it into something his body could use. The pain was incredible, but he was not dying. He was adapting. On the other side of the throne room, Amy was facing her own horror. The branding device looked like a metal spider with glowing red legs. The Zephyrian technicians held her down as they positioned it over her forehead. The neural inhibitor crown was still sparking on her head, making it hard for her to think clearly. "The mark of eternal shame," one of the technicians said in broken English. "It will burn deep into your brain. You will carry it forever." The device activated, and Amy felt fire explode across her forehead. But this was different from normal burning. The alien technology was not just marking her skin. It was trying to connect with her neural implants, the tiny computers that had been placed in her brain to help her interface with ship systems. Amy had been born with a rare condition that made her brain work differently. The military had found her when she was 12 and offered her parents a choice. Let their daughter undergo experimental surgery to install neural implants, or watch her struggle with learning disabilities for the rest of her life. Her parents had chosen the surgery. The implants had changed her. She could connect with computer systems in ways that other people could not. She could think in multiple streams at once, process information at incredible speeds, and interface directly with alien technology. It had made her the best communications officer in the fleet. Now, as the branding device burned into her forehead, her implants were fighting back. Instead of being marked as a slave, Amy felt the alien technology being absorbed into her own systems. The pain was incredible, but she could sense something changing in her brain. New pathways were forming. New connections were being made. The ceremony continued for what felt like hours. Jake burned in the plasma flames while Amy screamed under the branding device. The crowd of nobles watched and cheered, celebrating what they thought was the destruction of two human spies. Finally, it was over. The plasma flames died down, and the branding device was removed. Jake collapsed to the floor, his body covered in burns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Amy fell forward, the mark on her forehead still smoking. The queen looked down at them. From her throne, "Let this be a lesson," she announced. "This is what happens to those who oppose the Zephyrian Empire." The guards moved forward to collect what they assumed were two corpses. But as they reached for Jake, his eyes snapped open. The burns on his body were already beginning to heal, the damaged tissue rebuilding itself at an incredible rate. He grabbed one of the guards and threw him across the room with strength that should have been impossible for someone who had just been burned alive. Amy was also moving. The neural inhibitor crown had been damaged by the branding process, and her mind was suddenly clear. She could feel the alien technology in her brain, but instead of controlling her, it was responding to her commands. She reached out with her thoughts and touched the palace's computer systems. Alarms began to sound throughout the throne room. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, Jake and Amy moved. Jake's enhanced body allowed him to see in the dark. He fought through the crowd of panicking nobles, his burned hands leaving glowing fingerprints on everything he touched. The guards tried to stop him, but their weapons seemed to have no effect. His body absorbed the energy from their guns and converted it into more strength. Amy was moving through the palace's data systems like a ghost. She could see the building's layout in her mind, could control the doors and elevators and security systems. She opened a path for Jake, leading him through corridors that should have been locked and guarded. They reached the waste disposal systems beneath the palace. The tunnels were filled with the refuse of the alien city above, but they provided a way to escape. Jake and Amy crawled through the darkness, their bodies damaged but not broken. Their minds focused on one thing: survival. Behind them, the palace was in chaos. The Queen's guards searched every room, every corridor, every hidden space. But they found nothing. The two humans had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. 3 months later, Jake and Amy were living in the Undercity. The lowest levels of the Zephyrian capital were a maze of tunnels and chambers that had been forgotten by the empire above. Here, in the darkness and the filth, lived the people that the Queen wanted to pretend did not exist. There were failed genetic experiments, beings that had been created in the research labs and then discarded when they proved to be unsuccessful. There were political prisoners who had been sentenced to death but had somehow escaped. There were the descendants of conquered worlds, Species that had been enslaved so long ago that they had forgotten what freedom looked like. Jake had changed. The burns from the plasma flames had healed, but they had left marks on his body that glowed softly in the dark. His strength was far beyond what any human should possess, and his senses were sharper than ever before. He could hear conversations happening 3 tunnels away, could smell the approach of guards from hundreds of meters distance. Amy had changed too. The brand on her forehead had evolved into something complex and beautiful, a pattern of light that pulsed in rhythm with her thoughts. She could interface with any piece of Zephyrian technology just by looking at it, could hack into computer systems with a thought, could see the flow of information throughout the entire city. They were no longer entirely human, but they were still themselves. And they were angry. The first person they recruited was Carlos Rivera. He had been a maintenance worker on one of the human agricultural colonies until the Zephyrians had arrived. His family had been taken in the first wave of collections, loaded onto transport ships, and sent to the research stations. Carlos had escaped by hiding in the waste systems of his colony, but he had been captured later and brought to the capital. As a slave, Carlos knew the Undercity better than anyone. He had been living there for 2 years, surviving by fixing the ancient machinery that kept the lower levels habitable. He was small and quick, with hands that could repair anything and a mind that understood how complex systems worked. "The Queen thinks we are all dead or broken," Carlos told them during their first meeting. "She does not know that we are still here, still fighting. But we are alone, scattered, afraid. We need someone to bring us together." Jake and Amy looked at each other. They had been thinking the same thing. "We need to build something," Amy said. "Not just a hiding place. A real organization, something that can fight back." "The Queen took everything from us," Jake added. "Our lives, our families, our hope. But she made a mistake. She let us live." Carlos smiled for the first time in months. "What do you want to call this organization?" Jake looked down at his glowing scars. "The Burned," he said. "Because we were supposed to die, but we didn't. And now we're going to make sure everyone knows what that means." Over the following weeks, they began to gather others. Linda Brooks, a biotechnician whose family had been dissolved for refusing to participate in the experiments. Marcus Chun, a former soldier who had been captured during the fall of New Austin Colony. Dozens of others from dozens of different worlds, all united by their hatred of the Queen and their determination to survive. They started small, stealing food from the palace kitchens, sabotaging the machinery that kept the upper levels comfortable, rescuing prisoners who were being transported to the research stations. Each operation was carefully planned, and each success brought more people to their cause. The Queen's security forces began to notice the problems, but they assumed it was just random crime. They could not imagine that the 2 humans they had executed were still alive, still fighting, still building something that would soon threaten everything they had worked to create. In the darkness, beneath the Crystal Palace, Jake Morrison and Amy Parker were learning what it meant to be more than human. They were becoming something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before, humans who refused to break, who adapted and evolved and fought back no matter what was done to them. The Queen had tried to make an example of them. 6 months after their supposed deaths, Jake Morrison and Amy Parker had become legends in the Undercity. The Burned, as their organization was now called, had grown from a handful of survivors to a network of cells operating throughout the Zephyrian capital. Their symbol, based on Amy's transformed brand, appeared on walls throughout the lower levels, and even some of the upper city districts had begun to see the mark painted in hidden places. Jake stood in what had once been a maintenance chamber, deep beneath the palace. The room had been converted into their main command center, filled with salvaged equipment and stolen technology. Maps of the city covered the walls, marked with red dots showing guard positions and blue dots showing safe houses. The air hummed with the sound of computers processing information that Amy's enhanced mind collected from the Empire's data networks. "We have a problem," Amy said, her brand pulsing with light as she interfaced with the stolen communication equipment. "The Queen is planning something big. I'm seeing massive troop movements throughout the Empire. Ships being recalled from the frontier worlds. They're consolidating their forces. Linda Brooks looked up from the biological samples she was studying. She had been analyzing the genetic modifications that the Zephyrians were using on their prisoners, trying to find ways to reverse the damage. The research stations are being emptied too. They're moving all the human subjects to a central location. Jake felt his glowing scars brighten with anger. Where? Research Station Omega-7, Amy replied. It's in orbit around the third moon of this system. From what I can tell, they're planning to use it as a testing ground for something they call the Final Protocol. Carlos Rivera, who had been monitoring the palace's internal communications, turned away from his equipment. I've been hearing rumors about that in the servant quarters. The guards are scared. They're saying the Queen has found a way to extract something from human genetic material that will make her people immortal. That's impossible, Linda said. Biological immortality doesn't work that way. Maybe not for humans, Amy said, her voice distant as she processed data streams. But I'm seeing references to something called the life essence. The Zephyrians believe that humans have a unique genetic marker that can be refined and concentrated. They think it's the key to stopping their homeworld from dying. Jake had been learning about the Zephyrian Empire's secrets over the past months. Amy's ability to hack into their systems had revealed information that even the Queen's own nobles didn't know. The Empire was not as strong as it appeared. Their homeworld was slowly being poisoned by the very biological weapons they had used to conquer other species. The Queen herself was dying, kept alive only by constant genetic treatments. How many humans are at the research station? Jake asked. Amy's eyes went blank for a moment as she accessed the station's databases. Approximately 50,000. Men, women, and children from every human colony the Empire has attacked. They're being held in suspended animation until the final protocol is ready. The room fell silent. 50,000 people. It was more than just a rescue mission. It was a chance to strike a blow that would cripple the Queen's plans. We need to hit that station, Jake said. But it's not going to be easy. Orbital facilities have defenses that we can't match with what we have down here. Actually, Amy said, her brand flickering with rapid thought, we might have more resources than you think. I've been making contact with resistance cells on other worlds. The burned aren't just here in the capital anymore. The idea has spread. Over the next hour, Amy showed them what she had discovered. The symbol of the burned had appeared on 17 different worlds throughout the Empire. Small groups of survivors and rebels had adopted their name and their methods. Most were just causing minor disruptions, but some had grown into serious threats to Zephyrian control. There's a group on Kepler 442b that's been disrupting the mining operations, Amy explained. Another on New Britannia that's been freeing prisoners from the labor camps. And on Proxima Centauri, a former human military unit has been attacking supply convoys. Jake studied the star maps that Amy was projecting. Can we coordinate with them? I think so. My neural implants have evolved to the point where I can communicate across interstellar distances by tapping into the Empire's own communication networks. The Zephyrians don't even know I'm using their systems. Linda looked up from her work. If we're going to attack the research station, we need to know what we're facing. I've been studying the genetic modifications they're using on the prisoners. The process is reversible, but only if we can get to them within a certain time period. How long? Jake asked. Maybe 2 weeks after the final protocol begins. After that, the cellular damage becomes permanent. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. 50,000 lives were depending on them. But as he looked around the room at the faces of his team, he saw the same determination that had kept them alive through 6 months. Of impossible odds, we'll need to move fast, he said. Amy, can you get us detailed schematics of the research station? Already working on it, she replied. But Jake, there's something else. I've been monitoring the Queen's private communications. She's planning to attend the first phase of the final protocol personally. She'll be on the station when we attack. Jake's scars flared brighter. The queen who had ordered him burned, and Amy Branded would be within reach, but he pushed the thought of revenge aside. The mission was more important than personal satisfaction. That could work to our advantage, he said. If the queen is there, her security will be focused on protecting her. It might give us the opening we need. Over the next week, they planned the most ambitious operation in the history of the Burned. It would require coordination across multiple star systems, precise timing, and more luck than Jake was comfortable relying on. But it was their only chance to save the 50,000 prisoners and strike a blow that would shake the entire empire. The plan began with Amy's digital infiltration of the research station's computer systems. Her enhanced neural implants allowed her to slip past security protocols that would have stopped any normal hacker. She created false identities for Jake and his team, registered them as maintenance workers, and scheduled their transport to the station. Meanwhile, the Resistance cells on other worlds would launch simultaneous attacks on key military installations. The goal was to draw the Empire's forces away from the research station and create confusion throughout the entire sector. Jake's team for the station assault included Linda, who would need to oversee the reversal of the genetic modifications; Carlos, whose technical skills would be essential for disabling the station's defenses; and 12 other members of the Burned who had proven themselves in previous operations the night before they departed. Jake stood alone in the command center, studying the station schematics. Amy found him there, her brand glowing softly in the darkness. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Jake looked at his reflection in the darkened computer screen. His face was scarred from the plasma flames, his eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and his body was changed in ways that made him more than human. But inside, he was still the same person who had tried to warn Earth about the Zephyrian threat. "6 months ago, I was a simple pilot," he said. "Now I'm planning to assault a fortress in space and rescue 50,000 people. I don't know if anyone can be ready for something like that." Amy stepped closer, and Jake could see the complex patterns of light moving across her forehead. "The Queen thought she had broken us. She thought she had made us into examples of what happens when you oppose her. But she was wrong. She made us into something stronger. What if we fail?" Jake asked. "What if we get up there and find out that we're not as strong as we think we are?" "Then we'll adapt," Amy said. "That's what humans do. We find a way to survive, and we find a way to fight back. The Queen has never faced anything like us before." Jake nodded, feeling some of his doubts fade away. Amy was right. They had already survived things that should have killed them. They had built an organization from nothing, had turned the Empire's own outcasts into a force that could challenge the Queen's power. The next morning, they boarded a stolen transport ship and began their journey to Research Station Omega-7. As they left the planet's atmosphere, Jake looked back at the Crystal City where they had been tortured and sentenced to death. Soon they would return. But when they did, they would bring with them 50,000 freed prisoners and proof that the Zephyrian Empire could be defeated. The Queen had tried to destroy them. Instead, she had created the very force that would bring about her downfall. The Burned were no longer just survivors hiding in the darkness. They were becoming something that would make the entire galaxy tremble, and they were just getting started. Research Station Omega-7 hung in space like a giant metal spider, its long arms reaching out into the darkness. Each arm contained laboratories where the most horrible experiments in the galaxy were conducted. At the center of the station was the command hub, where Queen Veltara herself would oversee the final protocol. Jake Morrison floated in the maintenance shaft, his enhanced body adapted to the zero-gravity environment. Behind him, 13 other members of the Burned moved silently through the station's hidden passages. Their stolen maintenance uniforms and forged identification cards had gotten them past the outer security. But the real challenge was just beginning. Amy Parker's voice whispered in his earpiece, transmitted from her location in the data center 3 levels below. "I'm in their main computer system now. The security grid is more complex than we expected, but I'm finding ways around it." Her neural implants had evolved even further during their journey to the station. She could now interface with multiple computer systems simultaneously, her consciousness existing in both the physical world and the digital realm. The brand on her forehead pulsed with rapid light as she processed terabytes of information every second. "What's the status on the prisoners?" Jake asked quietly. "They're being held in the suspension chambers on levels 7 through 12. 50,000 people in induced comas, connected to machines that are slowly extracting their genetic material. Jake, some of these people have been here for over a year. Their bodies are starting to break down." Jake felt his scars flare with anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting emotional would not help the prisoners. Only careful planning and precise execution would save them. "Linda, what's your assessment?" he asked. Linda Brooks was in the station's medical bay, disguised as a research assistant. She had spent the past 2 hours studying the Zephyrian genetic extraction equipment, trying to understand how to reverse the process. "It's worse than we thought," she whispered back. "They're not just taking genetic material. They're trying to extract something they call the life essence. It's some kind of energy that exists in human cells but not in Zephyrian cells. The extraction process is killing the prisoners slowly. How long do we have? If we don't stop this in the next 6 hours, we'll start losing people. The ones who have been here longest are already showing signs of cellular breakdown." Carlos Rivera was working his way through the station's power systems, preparing to disable the security grid when Jake gave the signal. "The station's defenses have focused outward," he reported. "They're expecting attacks from ships, not from people already inside. But there are automated defense systems in the prisoner sections. We'll need to move fast once we start." Jake checked his chronometer. In 12 minutes, resistance cells across 17 different worlds would begin their coordinated attacks on Zephyrian military installations. The goal was to create so much chaos that the Empire's forces would be spread too thin to respond effectively to the rescue at Omega 7. "Amy, what's the Queen's location?" Jake asked. "She's in the central laboratory, overseeing the first phase of the final protocol. She has a full security detail with her, but I've been watching their patrol patterns. There's a 15-minute window every hour when the laboratory is less heavily guarded." Jake had been thinking about this moment for months. The alien queen who had ordered his death was finally within reach. But he had to remember that the mission came first. 50,000 lives were more important than his personal revenge. "Remember, we're here to save the prisoners," he told his team. "Everything else is secondary." But even as he said it, Jake knew that he would not be able to let the Queen escape. She was the source of all the suffering in the galaxy. As long as she lived, more innocent people would die in her experiments. The attacks began precisely on schedule. Amy monitored the communication channels as reports flooded in from across the Empire. The resistance cell on Kepler 442b had destroyed 3 mining facilities. The group on New Britannia had freed over 2,000 prisoners from the labor camps. On Proxima Centauri, the former military unit had captured an entire Zephyrian fleet. "It's working," Amy said. "The Empire's forces are being pulled in every direction. The station's requesting reinforcements, but there aren't any available." Jake gave the signal and the rescue operation began. Carlos cut the power to the security grid, plunging entire sections of the station into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a red glow that made the corridors look like the inside of a blood vessel. Jake and his team moved through the maintenance shafts toward the prisoner levels. His enhanced strength allowed him to tear through metal barriers that would have stopped normal humans. His improved senses let him detect guards long before they could see him. The first suspension chamber they reached contained 300 humans floating in clear tubes filled with blue liquid. Machines attached to their bodies pulsed with alien technology, slowly draining their life force. Some of the prisoners looked like they had aged decades during their time in the machines. Linda worked frantically to disconnect the extraction equipment while other team members began the process of waking the prisoners. "The revival process takes about 10 minutes per person," she explained. "We need to get them out of the tubes and into the escape pods as quickly as possible." But the Zephyrians had discovered the rescue attempt. Alarms began sounding throughout the station and automated defense systems activated. Gun turrets emerged from the walls, firing energy weapons that could slice through metal. Jake threw himself in front of one of the turrets, his enhanced body absorbing the energy blasts and converting them into additional strength. He grabbed the weapon and crushed it with his bare hands, the glowing scars on his arms bright enough to light up the entire corridor. "Amy, we need those security systems down now," he called out. "I'm working on it," she replied. "But the station's main computer is fighting back. It's like it has its own intelligence." The rescue continued floor by floor, chamber by chamber. Jake's team worked with desperate efficiency, reviving prisoners and getting them to the escape pods that Carlos had prepared. But progress was slow, and the Zephyrian guards were beginning to organize a counterattack on level 9. They encountered something that made Jake's blood run cold. The suspension chambers here contained children, some as young as 5 years old. The sight of them floating in the blue liquid, their small bodies connected to the extraction machines, filled him with a rage that made his scars burn like stars. "No. More," he said, his voice carrying a note that made his team step back. "No more of this." Jake began moving through the station like a force of nature. His enhanced body allowed him to tear through the Zephyrian defenses with ease. Guards who tried to stop him found themselves thrown across corridors with bone-breaking force. Blast doors that were designed to contain explosions crumpled under his hands like paper. Amy felt his rage through the communication link and realized that Jake was losing control. The genetic modifications that had saved his life were also changing. His mind, making him more aggressive, more violent than any human should be. "Jake, you need to calm down," she said. "We still have 8 levels of prisoners to rescue," but Jake was not listening. He had found the central laboratory where Queen Veltara was conducting her experiments. The door was made of the same crystal material as her throne, and it was guarded by her personal elite troops. Jake hit the door with enough force to shatter the crystal into 1,000 pieces. The guards opened fire, but their weapons only made him stronger. He moved through them like they were not even there, his focus entirely on the alien queen who stood at the center of the laboratory. Queen Veltara looked exactly as she had during the trial 6 months ago, except that her skin was paler and her movements were slower. The life essence extraction was keeping her alive, but she was clearly dying despite the treatments. "The burned human," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "You should be dead." "You made a mistake," Jake replied, his scars glowing so brightly that they cast shadows on the walls. "You thought killing us would solve your problems. Instead, you created something that you can't control." The queen activated a personal shield device, surrounding herself with a barrier of energy. "You are nothing but a failed experiment. A human who has been contaminated with alien technology. You are no longer even of your own species." "Maybe not," Jake said. "But I'm still human enough to hate what you've done to innocent people." The fight that followed was brief but destructive. Jake's enhanced strength allowed him to break through the queen's shields, while her forearms and advanced weapons gave her speed and reach. The laboratory was torn apart as they battled. Expensive equipment destroyed and chemical fires spreading across the walls. In the end, it was Amy who ended the fight. Her consciousness, existing simultaneously in the digital realm and the physical world, took control of the laboratory systems and turned them against the Queen, the same machines that had been used to extract life essence from human prisoners now drained the energy from the Queen's body. As Queen Veltara collapsed, her skin fading to a dull gray color, she looked up at Jake with her dark eyes. "You have won nothing," she whispered. "The Empire will continue without me. Others will take my place." The news of Queen Veltara's death spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours of the destruction of Research Station Omega-7, every world in the Zephyrian Empire knew that their immortal ruler was gone. The woman who had conquered 100 worlds and enslaved countless species had been killed by 2 humans who were supposed to have died months ago. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the transport ship carrying the rescued prisoners back to human space. Through the viewscreen, he could see the fleet of vessels that had joined them during their journey. Word of the rescue had reached the surviving human colonies, and ships had come from every corner of known space to escort the survivors home. But Jake's attention was focused on the reports coming in from across the Empire. Amy Parker, her neural implants now interfaced with communication arrays throughout the ship, was monitoring the chaos that had erupted in the wake of the Queen's death. "The Empire is tearing itself apart," she said, her brain pulsing with rapid light as she processed information from dozens of sources. Without the Queen to hold it together, the different factions are turning on each other. 3 different nobles have declared themselves the new ruler, and they're already fighting civil wars. Linda Brooks was working in the ship's medical bay, treating the rescued prisoners. Many of them were in bad condition after months or years of genetic extraction, but her research into Zephyrian biotechnology was helping her reverse much of the damage. "How are the prisoners doing?" Jake asked. "Better than expected," Linda replied. "The life essence extraction process was reversible for most of them. Some will need long-term treatment, but they're going to survive. The children are recovering, especially well." Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. The rescue mission had been successful, but he had been worried about lasting damage from the alien experiments. Knowing that the prisoners would recover made everything they had gone through worthwhile. Carlos Rivera was monitoring the ship's systems and coordinating with the other vessels in their convoy. "We're getting reports from the resistance cells on other worlds," he said. "The attacks we coordinated are still continuing. Without central command from the Empire, the local Zephyrian forces don't know how to respond." Amy's consciousness split between multiple data streams as she gathered intelligence from across the galaxy. "It's incredible," she said. 17 worlds have declared independence from the Empire in the past 6 hours. The labor camps are being liberated, the research stations are being shut down, and the surviving humans are being freed. But Jake knew that their work was not finished. The death of one tyrant did not automatically fix all the problems in the galaxy. There were still millions of people enslaved throughout the former empire, still research stations conducting horrible experiments, still Zephyrian nobles who thought they could take the Queen's place. "What's happening on the homeworld?" he asked. Amy's expression grew distant as she tapped into the communication networks around the Zephyrian capital. "Complete chaos. The Crystal Palace is under siege by 3 different armies, each claiming to represent the legitimate government. The Undercity where we used to hide has become a battlefield." Jake thought about all the people who had helped them during their months in hiding. The failed experiments, the political prisoners, the descendants of conquered worlds who had joined the burned. He hoped they were safe, but he knew that many of them were probably fighting and dying in the streets above their old hideout. "Can we help them?" he asked. "Maybe," Amy said, "but not directly. We're too far away and we have responsibilities to the people we've already rescued. But I've been in contact with the burn cells that are still operating in the capital. They're coordinating the uprising." The journey back to human space took 2 weeks. During that time, Jake watched as the Zephyrian Empire continued to collapse. The communication networks carried reports of worlds declaring independence, of slaves overthrowing their masters, of research stations being destroyed by their own subjects. The symbol of the burned appeared on planets that Jake had never heard of. The idea that had started in the Undercity beneath the Crystal Palace had spread across the galaxy, inspiring people to fight back against oppression wherever they found it. But Jake also saw the dark side of the Empire's collapse. Some worlds descended into chaos as different factions fought for control. Former slaves sometimes became the new oppressors, seeking revenge against anyone who had collaborated with the Zephyrians. The power vacuum left by the Queen's death was being filled by people who were not always better than what came before. When they finally reached Earth's solar system, Jake was surprised by what they found. A massive fleet of human ships was waiting. For them, not just military vessels, but civilian craft from every colony and settlement. The rescue of 50,000 prisoners had become a symbol of hope for all of humanity. Admiral Patricia Williams, The head of Earth's Stellar Defense Force came aboard their transport to meet with Jake and Amy personally. She was an older woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes, a veteran of humanity's first encounters with hostile alien species. "The entire human race owes you a debt," she told them. "What you accomplished was thought to be impossible. Two people, starting with nothing, brought down an empire that had conquered half the galaxy." Jake looked down at his scarred hands, still glowing faintly from the plasma burns that had changed his body. "We didn't do it alone. There were thousands of people who helped us, who fought with us, who died for the cause. The real heroes are the ones who joined the Burned when it was just a crazy idea in an underground hideout." Amy nodded, her brand pulsing softly as she continued to monitor communications from across the galaxy. "The Empire is finished, but the work isn't done. There are still people who need help, worlds that need to be rebuilt, systems that need to be reformed." Admiral Williams studied them both carefully. "You've changed," she said. "Both of you. The reports say you have abilities that normal humans don't possess." "The Zephyrians tried to break us," Jake replied. "Instead, they made us into something stronger. Something that could fight back. Are you still human?" The Admiral asked. Amy and Jake looked at each other. It was a question they had been asking themselves for months. Their bodies had been altered by alien technology, their minds enhanced by neural implants and genetic modifications. They could do things that no baseline human could do. "We're human where it matters," Amy said finally. "We still care about protecting innocent people. We still believe in fighting against oppression. We still remember what it's like to be weak and afraid and in need of help." "Then humanity is lucky to have you," Admiral Williams said. Over the following months, Jake and Amy worked with Earth's government to coordinate humanitarian missions throughout the former empire. The Burned had evolved from a resistance organization into something resembling a peacekeeping force, helping to maintain order on newly liberated worlds and ensuring that former slaves had the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Jake found himself leading missions to worlds where the collapse of Zephyrian rule had created power vacuums. His enhanced abilities made him nearly unstoppable in combat, but more importantly, his experience surviving as an outcast gave him insights into how to help societies rebuild from the ground up. Amy became the voice of the resistance, her neural implants allowing her to coordinate activities across dozens of worlds simultaneously. She worked to establish communication networks that would prevent isolated worlds from falling back into oppression, and she used her technological abilities to help former prisoners access the resources they needed. The Crystal Palace on the Zephyrian homeworld had been destroyed during the uprising, but Jake and Amy returned there 1 year after the Queen's death. The planet was slowly healing from centuries of environmental damage, and the former Undercity had become the heart of a new democratic government. Carlos Rivera met them at the spaceport, now wearing the uniform of the Provisional Government's technology minister. "You should see the memorial they're building," he told them. "It honors everyone who died under the Queen's rule, but there's a special section for the Burned." As they walked through the rebuilt city, Jake and Amy saw the changes that their rebellion had brought about. Former slaves worked alongside former nobles to rebuild infrastructure. Children who had been born in the research stations played in parks that had been constructed where torture chambers once stood. The memorial was made of the same living crystal that had once formed the Queen's throne, but now it pulsed with gentle light instead of cold authority. Names of the dead covered the walls in hundreds of different languages, and at the center stood a simple inscription. They were ordered burned and branded, but they lived. And in living, they taught us that no tyranny is permanent, no oppression is unbreakable, and no people are meant to be slaves. Jake touched one of the crystal walls, and it responded to his presence by glowing brighter. His reflection looked back at him, scarred and changed, but still recognizably human. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amy asked, her brand casting patterns of light on the memorial wall. Jake thought about all the people they had saved, all the worlds they had helped liberate, all the lives that were now free because two humans